In this tutorial I'm going to be going over the random spawning system we're going to be setting up. So there's enemy spawn 1, 2, or 3, and each location needs to spawn one of three different enemies, so it'll all be random depending on what generates in these locations. And so we have a goblin here, an orc, and a wizard, which are just different colored blocks for the time being. And I gave them a simple enemy script. Right now we don't have to worry about this too much because we're not going to be doing the actual combat in this one. We're just going to be doing the random spawning system. Now, we've worked with spawning systems before in the past, but we haven't worked with one that could spawn multiple enemies at each location, and we're also going to be giving each a separate tag. So right now there's no tag attached to any one of these. So when we spawn into a location, we want to either give it a tag for enemy 1, 2, or 3. This is what we're going to be using for telling which enemy the player is attacking. So when the enemy or the player moves to the battle attack point, it needs to know which enemy it's attacking. So if it moves to that point, it'll be attacking enemy 1, it'll look for the tag, and it'll deal damage depending on when an enemy is there. So we're just going to be working with a couple different variables there. So enemy script, there's nothing really special in here. We're not going to be messing with that. Just set up some basic values and where the health is displayed. Right now the health is overlapping for all of them, so that's a bug I have to work out, but yeah. So we're going to be working in our battle system for right now. A couple different things you have to create. We need to create an enemy 1, 2, and 3, which are game objects. Now these are going to be the prefabs, and we're going to be tossing our different enemies. So goblin, orc, and wizard, or was it wizard? Yeah, wizard. All three of those will be placed on each one of these, and then spawn 1, 2, or 3, which are right here for spawning our enemies. And so yeah, these are going to be game objects for the prefabs, and transforms are for positions, so for vector 3s that we're going to be using. At the start of our battle, we want to spawn enemies. So I'm going to have to rework this, so every time a battle starts, it spawns enemies. But for now, just for this tutorial, we're just going to throw it in the start. But this script is always going to be active, so it's not going to keep spawning new enemies. It's going to have to spawn new enemies when we enter a battle. So that'll have to be reworked later. So down here, spawn enemies is a brand new function that I created, and this will be what we're using for spawning enemies. Now this code looks pretty crazy right now, but it'll all make sense in a little bit here. So we're using a for loop, and so I equals 0, so at the beginning this variable for I is going to equal to 0. And we probably should have, I don't know if that really matters at all, put a variable there. So I equals 0. If I is less than 4, we're going to keep looping through this code. So it'll go 0, well first it'll go 1, 2, and 3. So if we want 3 enemies to spawn, we want it to be set for 4. If you wanted 4 to spawn, it needs to be set to 5, and so on and so forth. And then we'll go in here. So every time this loops through, it'll be recalling this code. And so we'll be recalling this random each time. And it's random.range of 0 through 3. So it'll go 0, 1, and 2, which will be pretty much for our random enemy that we're going to be spawning. So either it'll spawn enemy 1, enemy 2, or enemy 3, depending on which one of these randoms it calls. And also what we need to keep track of is which location we're going to be spawning in. That's what I is going to be used for. So I is going to, so this is pretty much a switch statement within a switch statement. If you didn't check out my Learn JavaScript tutorial, my brand new one covering switches, you might want to watch that. But I could go over a little bit here. So switches will grab a variable, so that variable right there, and depending on which number it rolls, it'll either call that one, or that one, and do everything inside of here. And it breaks off earlier than using if, else, if, and else, and it's best used for randoms. So yeah, so let's say it rolls a 0. So it's going to check the switch statement for random. If it's case 0, which if this equals 0, it'll call the code inside of here. So first thing it'll do is it'll create a variable for spawn enemy 1 equals instantiate enemy 1. So this is going to be enemy 1. So it would be spawning our goblin, since our goblin is going to be in the first slot. Because I can go into my main game, and in my battle thing I have enemy 1 set for goblin, and you can see the enemy spawns and spawn locations. So enemy 1 will be the goblin. So if it rolls a 0, it'll instantiate a goblin into this variable. And now we want to check for the switch for I, because we want to know which one we're at for which location to spawn at. So if this is at 0, right here, 0, we want to spawn this enemy at spawn 1, so our first spawn location. If this equals, or it should be pointing at this right here, because each time it loops through it'll be adding 1. So if this equals 1, it'll spawn at location 2, and if this equals 2, it'll spawn at spawn location 3. So each time it loops through, it wants to make sure, first off, which enemy we chose, and then from there, whichever enemy we chose, we want to loop through and find out which location we are currently on for I. And that's all it does. So it could spawn a goblin and spawn goblin at location 1, 2, or 3. If we want to spawn a orc, is it spawning at location 1, 2, or 3? And then same for wizard, 1, 2, or 3. So sorry if this is really confusing right now. It's just a way to tell which spawn location we're at. So when we're at the first one, it'll loop through this and find out which enemy we want, and it'll place depending on which node we are at. Loop through here, loop through there, and it'll spawn random enemies in those places. Now, apart from the transformed up position of the position of where we want to place that instantiated object, we also want to give it a tag when it's created. So this enemy will also be assigned a tag for depending on which one it is. Now let's see here. We're going to have to change all these up, it seems, because I guess I didn't do that correctly. Because it's either going to be enemy 1, 2, or 3, depending on which one. Hopefully my logic is correct on that. I don't think it would be very... Yeah, it should be fine, because if it's case 1 for any of them, it's going to be 2. So yeah, that's going to be correct. So what will happen is it also assign a tag to each of those created. So if one spawns here, let's say it's a wizard, it'll be given a enemy 1. This spawns and it's a wizard, it'll be given enemy 2, and so on. So even if it's the same exact enemy, they're going to be labeled with different tags depending on where they spawned at. And that's all we need for our spawn code currently. We'll go run through this a few times just so I can show you guys exactly what happens. You can see the battle text is a little messed up currently, overlapping. 4, 3, 2, 1. We might not get a 5 ever. And I'm almost off the map and I still haven't hit anything. And finally we spawn. So we have 2 yellow and a green. Let's go out, let's go back in. Or I guess I could have ran away, I should do that next time. But oh yeah, we don't have the battle system set up that way. Yellow, green, and blue. So we got all the different kinds of spawn here. And that's pretty much it for the random spawning. So in our next tutorial we're going to be going over how to have our player walk to this whichever location they select. So I might be doing the attack selection, so Well, it's already set up in the menu, but we're going to make it so our character can walk to that point and attack the enemy and deal damage to them and display that. And once they die, delete that that prefab.